Are you curious which actors on The Sopranos dragged entire scenes down with Olympian consistency? Every great series has its share of scene stealers. The Sopranos also has its share of scene stallers. Performances so clunky they momentarily snap the viewer out of New Jersey and into a local community theater matinee. The writing is not the culprit here. The performances themselves do the heavy lifting, dragging entire scenes down with admirable consistency. Leading the charge is Skip Lipari, whose very presence radiates the energy of a man auditioning for a role he already failed to get. His grotesque awkwardness might be unintentional, but it's unmistakably reliable. Close behind are Gabby Dante, whose line deliveries wander between polite neighbor and person reading cue cards across the room, and Elliot Kupferberg's short-haired daughter, remembered primarily for making Columbia University seem less intimidating simply by existing within its walls. Season 1 offers its own buffet of shaky performances, though early installment leniency can be granted. The show was still evolving. Some of the actors, unfortunately, never did. Animals, amazingly, fare no better or worse. Pai Oh My never quite sold the illusion of being a racehorse of any pedigree, though the goat in the stable showed admirable, if misplaced, enthusiasm. Cosette, meanwhile, delivered one of the series' most convincing non-human performances, her death scene radiating more emotional precision than several human characters ever managed. Occasionally, the series brings in ringers who, paradoxically, deliver less than the regular cast. Even Ben Kingsley manages a cameo so indifferent, one wonders if he misplaced his Oscar during filming and spent the entire episode searching for it. Elsewhere, Silvio Dante slowly morphs over the seasons into a walking cartoon of a mobster, a sort of live-action tribute to every animated stereotype ever committed to network television. Gabriella Dante, perpetually fine rather than exceptional, prompts no strong objections but earns few accolades. The show also delights, intentionally or not, in eruptions of overacting that achieve a kind of deranged poetry. The breathless monologue about Vegas, bouncer days, and Robert De Niro's alleged character flaws could qualify as its own form of performance art. Jeannie Cusimano's dual role opposite herself achieves a similar surrealism, wooden, uncanny, and made better precisely by how not quite convincing it is. The series occasionally wanders into a near Lynchian dreamscape, as seen in the unforgettable police interview with the My Pizza Never Hurt Nobody family, whose collective delivery hovers between civic testimony and experimental theater. But inconsistent acting from minor characters is one thing. A pivotal figure struggling on screen is another. The clearest example is Vito Spatafore. Joe Ganascoli simply lacked the range required for the ambitious storyline he was handed. His limitations are now almost endearing through familiarity, but they undeniably kneecapped what could have been a nuanced, compelling arc. In more capable hands, the material might have soared instead of merely trudging along. The series remains iconic, but its weaker performances are equally unforgettable, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes spectacularly. As one character so eloquently put it, many of these actors are lucky no one punched their lights out. The audience, meanwhile, survived the experience with eyesight intact, if occasionally strained from involuntary eye-rolling. Everyone praises The Sopranos for its subtlety, but the scenes that define Tony weren't subtle at all. They were brutal. Few television characters ever mastered the art of looking lethally composed, quite like Tony Soprano. The man could shuffle between suburban malaise and pure gangster menace with the ease of someone choosing a different tie, and every so often, the show allowed him to erupt into a vision of unvarnished, old-world brutality. One of the peak displays arrives in a knight in white satin armor, Tony entering Janice's house, Glock drawn, the picture of controlled violence. It is the rare moment when the suburban patriarch facade simply drops, replaced by a figure who looks as though he stepped out of a cautionary tale about crossing the wrong man. The scene serves as a reminder of what the series often implies but seldom states outright. Underneath the therapy sessions and backyard barbecues stands someone entirely capable of ending a crisis with a pull of the trigger. This wasn't an isolated flash of menace. There is the unforgettable coldness with which he wipes down the staple gun after pummeling Mikey Palmici, tossing it aside as if finishing a minor household chore. There is the casual ruthlessness of running Phil Leotardo off the road, and the sheer ferocity of the Coco curb stomp, moments that leave no doubt about the stakes of underestimating him. Tony's flair for theatrics only sharpened these moments. Storming into a restaurant with brazen disregard for decorum, operating heavy machinery with a cigar clenched between his teeth as Ralphie's remains disappear into the earth, briefly donning that infamous jacket, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who knows precisely how he looks. Even his throwaway interactions, lecturing Christopher about taking out Carmine Sr., lingering on the name Lupertazzi with performative gravitas, carry the ambiance of someone accustomed to being feared. And, of course, there is the finale of his relationship with cousin Tony Blundetto, rounding the corner, medical gloves on, shotgun ready, executing a grim obligation with the solemnity of a man performing last rites. No speech, no flourish, just the stark professionalism of a figure who has resigned himself to violence as a form of mercy. Whether sitting in a barn with Pio Mai and a goat, or stalking through New Jersey armed and unamused, Tony Soprano had an uncanny ability to look like the most dangerous man in any room. The series offered many riches, but few were as reliable as watching him slip, with almost comforting ease, into the chilling posture of a true gangster. Are you someone who ends up sympathizing with fictional criminals simply because the writers refuse to let you hate them properly? One of the great triumphs of televised moral decay is its ability to make viewers sympathize with characters who, in any functional society, would be kept at least 3 neighborhoods away. Yet here they are, eliciting pity, affection, and, occasionally, outright heartbreak. Take Paulie. Encountered in actual life, he would be the sort of man whose voicemail one deletes without listening. Yet, on screen, his loneliness hangs over him like a damp overcoat, softening his sharpest cruelties. His unintentional comedy only deepens the paradox. The more outrageous he becomes, the more plaintive his isolation appears. Eugene's tragedy arrives more compactly, but no less potently. His life is a cautionary tale about poor decisions compounding into a trap with no humane exit. Beneath that, however, lies genuine devotion to a family he cannot save, and a desperate, futile desire to free them from the world that already owns him. A full character arc delivered in a single episode, an almost insulting display of narrative efficiency. Even the horses aren't exempt. Pio Mai functions as a pastoral sigh in a universe otherwise fueled by extortion and emotional squalor. Too wholesome, too gentle, and therefore doomed, because sincerity is rarely welcome in this particular ecosystem. Ralphie, forever a case study in misdirected grievance, would have viewers believe he's simply a victim of being born handsome rather than wealthy. An unfortunate cosmic oversight, certainly, though perhaps not one that explains bodies mysteriously tripping and falling in his vicinity as he tries to watch a movie in peace. Then there is Carmela, an ethical contortionist whose moral outrage arrives only after she's ensured her lifestyle is fully funded by the man she publicly condemns. She entered the arrangement with eyes wide open, behaved abominably within it, and then blamed its architect for building precisely the house she agreed to live in. Yet even she inspires sympathy, thanks in part to the performance that reveals flickers of self-awareness beneath the gilded entitlement. Pussy's Descent offers its own brand of melancholy. The pitiful earnestness with which he treats his FBI contact as a budding friend, mapping out imaginary futures with a man paid to betray him, renders him less a hardened criminal than a child trying to negotiate adulthood with disastrously misplaced trust. Christopher's spiral is darker still. His abusiveness is neither softened nor excused, yet his battle with addiction exposes a rawness difficult to ignore. The constant undermining by those around him, the temptation embedded in every familiar pleasure, the gnawing desire for a better life without the tools to reach it, all set against the relentless manipulation of a mentor whose approval he seeks like oxygen. The tragedy is not that he never escapes, but that he never stood a chance. Some reserve their sympathy for Tony himself, a man whose emotional desolation often peeks through his brutality. Even the center of moral gravity in this universe, warped as it is, manages to evoke an uninvited pang of compassion. And then there is Adriana, a study in vulnerability exploited from every possible angle. Trapped by addiction, hemmed in by an abusive partner, and targeted by federal agents who treat her as an expendable inconvenience. She receives encouragement from every side to endure the very circumstances destroying her. She is offered pamphlets masquerading as lifelines, and advice masquerading as support, yet never the structural escape she so clearly deserves. In the end, the brilliance of this world lies in its ability to make the viewer's moral compass spin like a faulty ceiling fan. It invites sympathy for people who have done nothing to earn it, yet everything to need it. That is the peculiar, unsettling magic of watching terrible humans rendered so painfully, recognizably human. Everyone praises the show's realism, yet somehow no one questions the Escher-level absurdity of Melfi's building. The decor of Silvio's dentist, wedged inside the same drab fluorescent corridor as Dr. Melfi's serene, tastefully modern sanctum, remains one of television's more perplexing architectural mysteries. This medical building, apparently accessible through what looks suspiciously like a storefront, suggests that New Jersey real estate operates according to its own surreal geometry. The episode's staging makes the contrast impossible to ignore. Melfi's office is presented as a polished, almost ethereal refuge, an environment meticulously curated to separate psychiatry's abstract introspection from the tactile grime of daily life. Each time Tony crosses its threshold, he might as well be stepping out of the world altogether. The design reinforces the point. The space has no corners, curving in on itself like some therapeutic onion. The resulting effect demands an impressive suspension of disbelief. The architecture veers into territory more inventive than anything Escher ever sketched. A psychological funhouse masquerading as professional workspace. And then, as if to underline the absurdity of this serene enclave perched in a decidedly less than serene setting, the adjacent parking garage becomes the site of a violent assault, an event with the predictable consequence of sinking the surrounding property value. The building may house the mind's great unburdening, but its exterior remains firmly rooted in the world's brutal reality. Here's what no one wants to admit about that infamous Philly Parisi hit scene. It only works if everyone involved forgets they have a pulse. The spectacle of Philly Parisi standing motionless while a gun is raised to his face is one of those moments the series seems to play straight, despite resembling a parody of mobster reflexes. Gigi delivers his little send-off line, levels the weapon, and Philly, apparently auditioning for the role of a wax figure, offers not so much as a twitch. Little Polly, ever the scholar, fares no better. He gazes blankly upward just long enough to earn a bottle to the skull. The supposed streetwise enforcers react with all the urgency of houseplants. Of course, such passivity is hardly unprecedented. The universe of the show is generously populated by characters whose situational awareness hovers somewhere between sedated and non-existent. Jackie Jr., after all, fails to detect the approach of a man whose footsteps likely generate small seismic events. Janice and Richie's infamous standoff features the same vacant, wide-eyed stare, those Manson lamp expressions that suggest everyone involved has temporarily forgotten how cause and effect works. In fairness, surprise and misplaced trust do have their explanatory power. Philly, accustomed to camaraderie with Gigi, hardly anticipates betrayal, let alone a firearm pressed to his face. But this excuse strains under the weight of the scene's staging. Consider the elaborate ruse of the fake airport pickup. Borrowed luggage, logistical choreography, the works, only to culminate in the most inelegant plan imaginable: draw a gun and hope for the best. The strategy seems predicated on the assumption that Philly would simply stand there, politely awaiting execution. Heaven forbid he might reach for his own weapon, or, wild thought, move. The result is an awkward beat in an otherwise calculating narrative. A murder executed with theatrical flourish, but without the slightest concern for plausibility. They say this scene shows Carmine's humanity. Here's why it actually shows the opposite. Carmine's supposedly heartfelt injunction for Tony to be a better friend to himself in Season 3, Episode 3, is often mistaken for benevolence. In reality, it is simply another demonstration of New York's favorite pastime, reminding New Jersey who actually runs the playground. Carmine excels at the art of speaking in riddles that somehow all resolve to the same answer. New York sees everything, controls everything, and considers Jersey little more than a regional sales office with delusions of grandeur. The subtext grows louder when Tony's therapy enters the picture. Nothing delights a power broker quite like the scent of vulnerability wafting from a rival family. A boss unloading his neuroses on a psychiatrist? For Carmine, that's not a moment of compassion, that's a strategic opening. New York already views Jersey as a glorified crew, and Tony's perceived fragility only polishes that impression. Of course, for an organization built on performative loyalty, these men seem to despise each other with remarkable consistency. One can practically hear the unspoken critiques. No one wants to listen to the endless anecdotes, the forced humor, the long-winded monologues. The polite solution would be to stay in the metaphorical kitchen and spare the room. As always, Carmine communicates in that trademark elliptical fashion, an entire conversation delivered in implications and insinuations. Whether the lines land as gentle counsel or not so gentle condescension depends on how one interprets the power dynamics. Some viewers insist the moment was a sincere gesture, citing a lack of concrete evidence for a hidden agenda. Others view it as a dual-purpose maneuver, a reminder of New York's reach, certainly, but also a pragmatic concern for stability. After all, if Tony collapses, who steps in? At the time, both families enjoyed a profitable equilibrium, and even Carmine has no desire to disrupt a revenue stream simply to savor a point scored in the hierarchy. The interpretation may vary, but one truth remains consistent. In this world, kindness is rarely unaccompanied by calculation, and every friendly remark functions equally well as a quiet assertion of dominance. Here's why the most satisfying kill on The Sopranos wasn't Tony's, Phil's, or anyone you'd expect. The gallery of demises in The Sopranos is a crowded one, yet few departures achieve the operatic absurdity of Fat Dom's. His final moments play out like a masterclass in how not to survive a room full of men with fragile egos and ready access to household appliances. Bursting in with bravado, needling the wrong people, and then acting shocked when Syl responds with a vacuum cleaner to the skull? This is Darwinism as interpreted by organized crime. Carlo finishing the job merely completes the choreography. Of course, competition for best exit is fierce. Phil Leotardo's demise certainly earns an honorable mention, if only for the sheer spectacle of it, a moment so chaotic and unceremonious that observers can't help but wonder what precisely just unfolded. Ralph Cifaretto's death, however, satisfies on an entirely different register. After the cruelty inflicted on Tracy, his end feels less like a plot twist and more like overdue cosmic bookkeeping. Tony's rage, long simmering, finally detonates in a confrontation so intimate and brutal that it eclipses nearly every other reckoning the series offers. And then there are the aspirationally foolish, like the man who attempted to fly over the falls, a stunt so baffling it practically begs for an advisory label. Equally confounding is the notion that one could boast about killing a captain from another family, casually implicate a second captain in the same crime while he stands within arm's reach, and then expect to stroll back out the door unscathed. Fat Dom's confidence in that fantasy remains one of the show's most unintentionally comic feats. He wasn't merely courting danger, he was auditioning for it. In a universe governed by egos, vendettas, and the occasional vacuum cleaner, some deaths stand out not for their tragedy, but for their spectacular inevitability. Fat Dom's, in all its misguided swagger and richly earned consequences, may well be the crown jewel. Never assume a title guarantees respect. Tony spends 6 seasons proving the opposite. Tony Soprano is perpetually framed as a boss, yet he operates with all the gravitas of a harried street captain. The traditional aura of distance and authority, once embodied by figures like Carlo Gambino and even the showier John Gotti, never quite materializes around him. His men talk back, cross lines, and treat hierarchy as a polite suggestion. The supposed dawn of a New Jersey Borgata moved through his world with no mystique and even less command presence. One begins to wonder whether New York's condescension toward this pygmy crew had more truth to it than anyone on the Jersey side would like to admit. The problem is not simply stylistic missteps, though the notorious shorts hardly bolster the gravitas of a man meant to project authority. The deeper issue is Tony's chronic refusal to behave like a boss, except when selectively convenient. Whether out of addiction to the thrill of proximity or a fundamental distrust of his own subordinates, he clings to street-level involvement with a desperation that would embarrass any leader who understands the value of distance. The result is predictable. A leader who cannot relinquish control becomes a leader whose subordinates cease to respect him. Throughout the series, his crew voices its frustration, quietly, cautiously, but persistently, over how his impulsiveness and overbearing temperament sabotage even the simplest operations, their loyalty phrased long before the legal noose tightens. By the time they are holed up together late in the series, resentment is no longer subtext. It is ambient air. They can barely wait for him to leave the room before lamenting the chaos his stubbornness has inflicted upon them. This managerial disaster has legal consequences as well. A boss who meddles in every detail also creates an evidentiary trail wide enough for a federal parade. Even at his most competent, Tony treats people with a hostility that borders on recreational cruelty. His treatment of Carlo is particularly striking. After presenting the promotion to captain as a magnanimous gesture, he proceeds to undermine and humiliate him at every turn, including for failures that originate squarely with Tony. Under such conditions, the decision to cooperate with law enforcement becomes less a betrayal than an inevitability. Tony seems to grasp this, however dimly. The tragedy is that the need for distance and delegation is repeatedly spelled out for him by those qualified to advise him, yet he never sustains the discipline. Any brief flirtation with acting like an actual boss collapses under the weight of his impulses. All of this sits neatly within one of the show's central themes. The mob is a fading institution, long past its golden age. From the pilot to the final image of Butchie wandering through a hollowed-out Little Italy, the series underscores the decline. Contemporary real-world bosses, names like Michael Mancuso or Mike DeSantis, bear little resemblance to the titans of earlier generations. Tony inherits a diminished throne, but instead of compensating with discipline or strategy, he compensates with shorts, tantrums, and chronic micromanagement. The result is a portrait of a man born to a legacy he cannot uphold, presiding over an empire already in retreat, and doing so with the demeanor of a boss who never quite learned how to be one. Subscribe for more.